Welcome to Libyth. Today we're looking at how the Tsurezuregusa is built. And the first thing to say is that it is built to look unbuilt, which is itself a form of architecture, and not an easy one to sustain across 243 essays without either collapsing into incoherence or accidentally revealing the scaffolding. 243 essays. No chapters. No announced sections. No explicit through line, connecting the beginning to the end. The essays simply proceed, varying in length from a single sentence to several pages, moving between topics without transition or apology. From the moon to old court customs to the ethics of carpentry to the correct attitude toward old age. And then they stop. Not conclude. Stop. The collection does not arrive anywhere. It accumulates, and the accumulation is the form. To understand why this is difficult to sustain, it helps to think about what the Zuihitsu form is asking of itself. Most literary forms have a built-in structural logic that carries the work forward. Narrative has causality and consequence. Argument has premise and conclusion. Lyric poetry has the pressure of a single sustained emotional moment. The Zuihitsu has none of these. Its stated organizing principle is the movement of thought itself, which means the form's coherence depends entirely on the coherence of the mind doing the thinking. If that mind is scattered or shallow or performing rather than genuinely attending, the form produces nothing, just a pile of observations with no internal pressure. If the mind is genuinely coherent, not in the sense of systematic, but in the sense of having a consistent direction, a consistent set of concerns that pull at it from different angles, then the form can produce something that no other form can. The experience of a sensibility, accumulated across many different subjects and registers, until the reader doesn't just understand the argument, but has, in some sense, inhabited it. This is what the Tsurezuregusa achieves, and it achieves it because Kenko's attention, though it moves freely, always returns to the same gravitational center. That center is impermanence, not as a topic exactly, but as a lens through which every other topic becomes interesting. The moon essay is not primarily about the moon. It is about what incompleteness does to perception. The cherry blossom essay is not primarily about cherry blossoms. It is about what brevity does to attention. The essay about the ambitious man is not primarily about ambition. It is about the specific error of living as if permanence were available. The essay about the correct arrangement of a room is not primarily about interior decoration. It is about the difference between an arrangement that strains for effect, that is trying to look a certain way, and an arrangement that simply is what it is, without remainder. Every essay, followed far enough, arrives at the same place. The variety of subjects is the form's way of approaching an insight from enough angles that the insight eventually becomes visible as a shape rather than a statement. The opening essay does something that is easy to overlook and very precise. Kenko describes sitting before his inkstone in idleness, letting thoughts come and go, jotting them down almost absently, and notes the strange, slightly melancholy feeling that overtakes him when he does this. When he realizes he has spent whole days this way, following stray thoughts onto the page without knowing in advance where they will go. The Japanese word he uses for the feeling is translated variously as demented, strange, or melancholy. It carries a sense of slight disorientation, of a condition that is pleasurable and slightly unmoored at the same time. This is an unusual opening for a work that became a major literary text. There is no statement of purpose, no announcement of theme, no frame that positions the reader and tells them what to expect. There is only the observation that something is happening, that the brush is moving, that the thoughts are coming, and that the experience of it is strange. The book opens in the middle of a mental condition, rather than at the beginning of a project. This is deliberate. It tells you exactly what kind of text you are reading. Not a text that knows where it is going, but a text that is honest about not knowing, and that treats that not knowing as the condition rather than the problem. Essay 7 is the closest the book comes to a statement of doctrine, and it is worth spending time with because it announces a principle that restructures everything that follows. In all things, Kenko writes, it is the beginnings and ends that are interesting. Not the middle. Not the arrival. Not the moment of full presence, full bloom, full visibility, but the approach and the departure, the threshold states, the moments of becoming and of leaving. He applies this to the seasons. The late days of each season, when it has not yet fully departed, carry something that the season's peak does not. He applies it to the day. Early morning and late evening are more beautiful than noon. He applies it to ceremonies. The beginning and the end are more moving than the middle, when the ceremony is simply occurring, when it has settled into itself. He applies it to the moon. The nearly full moon the night before the full is more beautiful than the full moon itself, because the nearly full still contains the anticipation of what it is about to become. This is not a casual observation about aesthetic preferences. It is a systematic reorientation of attention, a claim that the most interesting thing about any phenomenon is not the phenomenon at its peak, but the phenomenon in transition. And if you follow this seriously, it reorganizes almost everything. It means that the proper object of attention is always the edge, the threshold, the moment of change. It means that completion is actually a kind of ending, not the fulfillment of what the thing was becoming, but its closure, the moment when it stops being in process and settles into being what it is. Which means that the most alive moment of anything is before it has fully arrived, or after it has begun to leave. Beginnings and endings are alive. Middles have settled. The principle is aesthetic, but it is also phenomenological, a description of where experience is most intensely itself. And it connects directly to the Buddhist understanding of impermanence, which is not that things end, but that things are always ending, always in the process of dissolution, and that the perception of this is not a cause for grief, but a condition of genuine seeing. The range the form can accommodate is demonstrated most sharply by Essay 137, which is a single sentence. The sentence is brief enough that to quote it would be to give away the compression. What matters is what its existence in the collection demonstrates, that the Zuihitsu form is not committed to any particular scale of treatment. A thought that can be fully expressed in a sentence should be expressed in a sentence. A thought that requires several pages should take several pages. The length of each essay is determined by the thought it contains, not by convention, not by the expectations of an imagined reader, not by the desire to seem appropriately serious or thorough. This sounds obvious. In practice, it is extraordinarily difficult because it requires the writer to have developed such sensitivity to the specific gravity of each thought that they can feel when it is complete without the external validation of conventional form. Most writers solve the problem of length by convention. Essays are a certain length. Poems are a certain length. Because solving it by feel requires a precision of self-awareness that is genuinely rare. The Tsurezuregusa solves it by feel, a across 243 essays, and the consistency of the solution is one of the book's most quietly remarkable achievements. There is one essay in particular that illuminates the book's relationship to its own form in a way worth dwelling on. Kenko writes about a man who begins building a house, gets the framework up, makes real progress on the structure, and then leaves it unfinished. The project is abandoned for reasons the essay doesn't specify. The frame stands open to weather, half-built, the intention visible in the structure without the structure being completed. And Kenko finds this more moving than a finished house would be. The finished house has resolved into itself. It is what it is, complete, closed, no longer reaching toward anything. The half-built house still contains the future. The intention is readable in the form without being fulfilled by it. What was going to be is still legible in what partially is. This is a precise description of the Tsurezuregusa itself. 243 essays that do not finish in the way a finished thing finishes, that remain in motion, that leave the intention readable in the structure, that refuse to resolve into the completion that would also be a closure. The book is the half-built house, and Kenko knows this, and he has made it this way on purpose. The connection to other traditions in which this impulse appears is worth making, because it illuminates what is universal in what is also specifically Japanese. Montaigne, writing in France in the 1580s, 2.5 centuries after Kenko, produces a form nearly identical in its logic. Essays that follow thought without predetermined destination, that use the self as the instrument through which the world becomes legible, that resist the closure of argument in favor of the openness of genuine inquiry. Montaigne's essays grow longer and more complex over his writing life, as if the form is expanding to contain more of what he discovers about how thinking works. He is noisier than Kenko, he argues, contradicts himself, circles back, admits the contradiction with evident pleasure. Kenko is quieter, more restrained, more committed to demonstration over argument. But the underlying project is the same: the cultivation of a certain quality of attention, enacted through writing, as a response to what it is to be a mortal person in a world of passing things. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations offers a different but related parallel. These are private notes, written to himself, not for publication, not for an audience at all, that became literature precisely because the honesty of the private voice turned out to be more interesting than any public performance. Aurelius is working on Stoic philosophy. Kenko is working on Buddhist aesthetics, and their specific conclusions are different. But both are engaged in the same fundamental project, using writing as a practice of attention rather than a production of argument, writing toward clarity rather than toward persuasion. The texts that come from this practice have a quality that is recognizable across traditions and centuries, a quality of genuine engagement with thought that produces not positions but orientations, not conclusions but ways of seeing. What the Tsurezuregusa leaves out is as structurally significant as what it includes. It leaves out resolution. The essays never find the stable resting point that argument reaches for, never conclude. It leaves out the inner life directly. Kenko is present in every essay through his preferences and attention, but he almost never says directly what he feels, never writes from the inside of an emotion, never confesses in the way that Western literary tradition tends to value confession. The self is visible only through the consistency of its responses to the world, through taste, through the direction of attention, through the things that keep coming back regardless of what the ostensible subject is. and it leaves out the political crisis surrounding it, the violence reorganizing the country during the years of composition, which appears almost nowhere. These absences are not gaps. They are part of the architecture. The form that follows thought cannot go where thought, organized around attention to the present moment, does not naturally go, which is to say toward resolution, toward self-exposure, toward the noise of emergency. The brush, following thought, simply does not go there. The book ends because it stops. The final essays carry no more weight of conclusion than the earlier ones. There is no gathering of threads, no retrospective gesture, no achieved wisdom that crowns what has come before. And this is honest in the way that only certain kinds of art are honest. It refuses the false satisfaction of an ending that the material does not actually warrant. Thought does not end. Attention does not conclude. The world does not resolve itself into a lesson that can be stated once and then left. The pause at 243 is arbitrary in the sense that it could have been 242 or 244. But it is also honest, because it acknowledges that the form has no natural terminus, that the Zuihitsu pauses rather than concludes, and that the pause is all there is. What remains when the reading is done is not a conclusion but a residue. The accumulated effect of having followed this particular mind through this particular sequence of noticing, until your own attention has been altered in ways that are difficult to specify, but are real. That alteration is what the book was always trying to produce. That's all for today on Libyth. One new book every week. At least we try.